home race wins, disqualifications and angry team principals, this week I'm chatting all about the Monaco Grand Prix. So get ready, because you've been summoned to the Steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Steward's office. I'm Saira and this week we are chatting all about the Monaco Grand Prix. Now, whenever we head out to Monaco for this weekend in F1, it always brings up a lot of mixed feelings for fans. It is known as the crown jewel in Formula 1, it forms part of the Triple Crown in motorsport, and there's a lot of prestige that comes along with winning in Monaco. However, it's not the best track for racing, not for Formula 1 cars. Formula 3, Formula 2, when we have Formula E head out there, there is so much overtaking and on-track action. But with Formula 1, the cars are so big, so heavy, and it's really difficult to overtake on a track like Monaco anyway, let alone with this generation of Formula 1 cars. So there are mixed feelings, and I have mixed feelings towards it, right? I love the history that comes along with Monaco. I love the prestige that comes along with it. I love seeing how much it matters to the drivers to win Monaco, right? However, I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that we don't have extremely good racing there, and I'm well aware of that. I love the build up to Monaco, I think, and I love qualifying in Monaco, but the race itself doesn't always give the most interesting part of the weekend. But let's actually get into what went on over this weekend, and I don't think news-wise there was a whole load to cover, not a lot going on between Imola and Monaco because it's been a double header. So not really any news to cover in that respect. So I am just going to jump into what actually went on over this race weekend, so at practice, qualifying, and then the race. I think throughout all three practice sessions, the standout thing that happened was the fact that Red Bull did not seem on top of their car. And this happened out in Imola during the practice sessions as well. But in Monaco, it just seemed a little bit more difficult for them. The car really did not seem drivable in Monaco, especially compared to Imola, right? Definitely felt like it was a little bit worse in those practice sessions. Sergio and Max both weren't happy at all. It wasn't just one driver that was complaining. Both of them were really unhappy with the car, and it all came back to curb riding for them. The ride height of the car. Max was saying he felt like he was jumping up and down like a kangaroo in the car and it was giving him a headache. Sergio Perez echoed similar sentiments. It just wasn't a comfortable ride for them. And the thing is, in a place like Monaco where it's a street track and the walls are very close, it's a narrow track when we head out to Monaco, right? And you have to be so careful and have so much confidence in your car. You need to have that confidence to be quick, to get around that car and get the fastest lap possible. But you also need that confidence to be quick and then not hit the walls. There are not many runoff areas in Monaco. You are mainly seeing a lot of escape roads. It's not like some of the other tracks that we go to, even street tracks that might have a bit more runoff area. Monaco, there are just walls, so many walls lining this circuit. So they need to be quick and they need to be careful. And to have both of those things, you need to be confident in the car. So I don't think either driver throughout practice sessions were really able to extract as much as they could because they weren't comfortable, because the car was bouncing around, and yeah, at the end of the day, you don't want to be crashing into a wall. So main headline from all through practice sessions for me was the fact that Red Bull were not happy. A team that definitely surprised me during the practice sessions though were Mercedes. They came with a new front wing that was only on George Russell's car. They had spoken about it, both him and Lewis, and they'd opted to have George have that front wing. But even Lewis, who didn't have that upgrade throughout the practice sessions, both cars seemed to be doing okay. They seemed to be doing pretty well. Lewis finished in the top 3 for all 3 practice sessions. So they were another anomaly during practice because I didn't think Red Bull were going to do that badly, and I definitely didn't think Mercedes were going to be that consistently good in practice, right? Ferrari and McLaren, however, seemed to have really good practice sessions. I think Ferrari had better practice sessions compared to McLaren. All of the other teams kind of fell where I'd expect them to in practice. Practice itself, though, was fairly incident-free, except for in FP3. Bottas managed to crash his kick Sauber, and yeah, we had a red flag for that while he cleared everything up. But other than that, all the drivers were pretty well behaved during practice. So heading into qualifying on Saturday, and as I mentioned at the start of this episode, Qualifying is the most exciting part of Monaco, and I think most people will agree with that because we don't get many overtakes during the actual race. This is definitely a race where qualifying matters so much more compared to any other circuit. Drivers are always going to want to start as high as they can. They always want to get pole position, start on the front row, right? But in Monaco, it just matters so much more because we don't get overtaking done very much. So grid position really is king when we head out to the Monaco Grand Prix. So what you end up getting are drivers really having to show off every little bit of skill that they have, really having to rinse every single bit of speed they can out of the car. And for that, they need confidence in it, right? Now, Charles Leclerc has not had the best of luck at Monaco at his home Grand Prix, and I was praying going into this weekend that he would have a good weekend. I was praying for a win. At the very least, was hoping that he would finish his home race because there have been multiple times since he's become an F1 driver that he's not been able to actually finish his home Grand Prix. And whenever any of the drivers have a home Grand Prix, if they're lucky enough to have a race in the country they come from, I just want them to do well, right? Because it matters so much to them. These are races they watched growing up, the races that they attended growing up, the races that they've dreamed of winning. There'll always be other circuits, but I feel like for a lot of the drivers, their home Grand Prix is always a race that they want to win. Always a race that they want to be able to finish, to score points in, to get a podium. At the very least, I would like to see a driver finish their home Grand Prix. So I had a lot of hope before Charles Leclerc going into this race, a lot of nervous hope. And all of the practice sessions for him looked so strong. He was setting the pace. The Ferrari looked so strong. It looked quick. And in the hands of Charles Leclerc in particular, it looked rapid. Going into Q1 though, and I had concerns when he wasn't exactly as quick as he had been, and I think he ended up in 11th or 12th when we heard the radio of him telling his race engineer that basically they'd put him out of sync with all of the other drivers. He wasn't on the same program as them, and it was putting him at a bit of a disadvantage because he was out of that cycle. And the panic started to set in a little bit because what I didn't want was for Charles to have had this brilliant weekend up until this point, and then Ferrari having done something that would mess it up a little bit, especially during qualifying because of how important quali is. They needed him to have a good qualifying. I needed him to have a good qualifying. Thankfully though, that was not a problem. He set a rapid time. Everything was fine. No need to worry for Charles Leclerc. However, there were a couple of drivers who were in for a bit of a shock during Q1. Two drivers, right, that I thought would have been able to make it into Q2 and Q3, to be fair, did not manage to do it. And that was Sergio Perez in the Red Bull and Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. Now, Sergio Perez, even though, yes, the car was a struggle throughout practice, Max seemed to have a little bit of a better handle on it by the time we got to qualifying. And even though Sergio had been struggling, I didn't think he was going to struggle to get out of Q1. Maybe getting out of Q3, but I thought he would have enough in there to get into Q2, but he just didn't. He ended up eliminated and just could not pull a good lap together. Same kind of story with Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. He had actually done really well in practice sessions, but this is now the second race weekend in a row where he hasn't managed to get out of Q1. So gutting for both of those drivers, but when you have two drivers in top teams being eliminated in Q1, it does give some of the other drivers a chance to see if they can get into Q2 and then Q3, right? Q2 though, I mean, Max seemed a little bit more confident, seemed more comfortable with the car. He was setting the pace in Q2. Alpine managed to make it out of Q2. Well, Pierre Gasly's Alpine managed to make it out of Q2 and into Q3, which was amazing. And then the other driver that did a very, very good job as well was Alex Albon. This is the first time that Williams have managed to get into Q3 this year. They've not managed it before Monaco, but he pulled in an extremely good lap time and managed to get into Q3. Stroll ended up being knocked out, so that was both Aston Martins that hadn't managed to make it into the final stage of qualifying. I really just don't know what's going on there, whether the car is not suited to Monaco. But yeah, to have both of your cars not able to make it into Q3 when you had such a big upgrade package coming in last race in Imola. Little bit surprised, and this isn't great for them either. Going into Q3 though, Charles Leclerc did take pole position. Oscar Piastri was lining up next to him, and unlike in Imola when Oscar got P2 and then had a grid place penalty, he kept his P2 this time, guys. He was going to be starting on the front row. After him was Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, then it was George Russell. 6th place, Max Verstappen managed to get for his Monaco Grand Prix qualifying. Now, he did try and pull in a really quick flying lap at the end of Q3, but it was too much. I think he pushed a little bit too much and it didn't pay off. And that happens. But yeah, 6th place was the most he managed to get. And then Lewis Hamilton in P7. So the pace that Mercedes seemed to have in practice, once again, did not seem to actually materialize when we got to qualifying. And that has been their story, is that even when they seem to have a little bit of pace right in practice, wherever that is in practice, it just seems to be worse when they get to qualify and they're struggling to get a Q2, or they're not qualifying as high as what they were showing in practice. But I think the shocker there was definitely Max Verstappen in Q3 not being on the front row, not being on the second row, starting on the third row of the Monaco Grand Prix, and this was probably the worst weekend for qualifying not to go well for Max. That car though, once again, I don't think it's a him issue, it really was a car issue. Red Bull just could not understand and figure out how to dial that car in. They had to work with what they had, Max had to work with what he had, and at least he made it into Q3. Post-quali though, we did have news that both Haas cars, both Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, were being disqualified from qualifying. They had, well, not them, the team, right? It wasn't Kevin and it wasn't Nico technically, but the team had breached technical regulations and there was an issue with their rear wings. Both the cars, the rear wings breached what was written in the technical regulations and they had to be disqualified from the qualifying session because of it. That did mean a pit lane start, and then we had news a little bit later that they weren't going to be starting from the pit lane. Both drivers would be starting on the grid, but they would be starting in P19 and P20. Let's get into the race though, and look, I have got to be honest with you, other than lap 1, not a whole lot going on in this race, but let's just dive into it, right? Lap 1, massive incident, and I want to break this down with you guys, right? Because I don't understand what some of the decisions were that the stewards made. Biggest incident that happened was between Sergio Perez, Kevin Magnussen, and Nico Hülkenberg. Now, I'm really glad we did not see that crash happen live. I'm really glad that we didn't have the TV director actually showing that straight away and we got to see the replays, because the state that Sergio Perez's car was in when they showed us and they panned to the incident and it had happened, it was just 3 cars on the track. My heart was in my mouth until I saw that Sergio Perez was out of his car. His car was absolutely wrecked. It was horrible seeing it. The front wing was off, the side pods were gone, and it literally just looked like the cockpit, like the survival cell, was all that was sort of held together, which is also wonderful, and it's what the F1 car should do in a crash like that, because it's what protects the drivers. However, if I hadn't seen Sergio Perez standing up outside of his car, I don't know, guys. I honestly, my heart was in my mouth until I actually saw Sergio Perez just standing there, and I thought, okay, well, at least he's safe and out of the car. That is the main thing. But once I saw him okay and out of the car and walking around and the other 2 drivers, I then wondered what the heck happened that caused that much damage to a car. I think it's been a little while since I've seen a car that badly beat up. The last time must have been, I think it was 2022 Saudi Arabia qualifying with Mick Schumacher, when the car seemed to just break in half, which is what it should do. But I think that's the last time I saw a car with that much damage. Even Zhou's crash in Silverstone 2023, maybe 2022. That crash was bad, but I can't remember seeing a car in that bad of a state. Sergio Perez's car was looking awful. They did show us the replays, and wow, what was going on? Sergio obviously starting at the back of the grid because of qualifying. Both Haas is at the back of the grid because of their disqualification. That turned into just starting at the back of the grid. There are mixed opinions on this, right? And I'm not saying necessarily that anyone is primarily to blame here. However, Kevin Magnussen was being especially racy. I think Sergio Perez had taken a line and he was looking in his mirrors, right? From what they showed us in the replay, they were looking in his mirrors. Kevin was driving, trying to get through a gap, trying to get past Sergio Perez. There just wasn't enough room, right? And we don't have the data, and we haven't spoken necessarily to the drivers properly in a way to understand what was going through any of their minds at this point. But there was not room. Kevin tried to get through, made contact with Sergio Perez, and then Perez knocked into Hülkenberg, and that was the end of their races. But the contact that Perez had from Magnussen just meant, yeah, he went into a wall. It destroyed his side pods, his nose, just the car's nose now, just completely was wrecked. And yeah, it was awful. And the fact that all three of them got out of that not harmed, absolutely okay, was the main thing. Apparently there was a photographer that was hit by some of the debris, but they are also okay, so at least everyone was safe. But what I didn't understand with this incident, right? It was awful. 3 drivers had to DNF. There is going to be a complete rebuild of Sergio Perez's car at this point, right? Because no side pods, no front wing, barely a car there, guys. So they're going to have to completely rebuild that. But this didn't get sent up to the stewards at all. There was no proper investigation done into this. And this isn't to try and apportion blame to any of the drivers here, because like I said, I don't have the data. I don't have what the teams are saying and what they saw on their telemetry. I don't have what the drivers are saying, what was going through their mind at the time, right? But that's the whole point in why these sort of incidents get investigated, because you can figure out if there's anyone primarily to blame that you then, you know, need to give a penalty to or wherever, or whether it's just like, look, we investigated, no one's at fault, and it just clears it all up. Now, usually what happens with lap 1 incidents is that they are just called lap 1 incidents. But that hasn't always been the case, right? And what I don't understand is that there was another incident that happened in lap 1 that wasn't called a lap 1 incident, that got investigated and a penalty was given. Now that incident was between Esteban Ocon and his teammate, Pierre Gasly. Once again, we didn't see this. They showed the replays afterwards. But yeah, there was no need for Esteban to kind of go in for that lunge. Esteban tried to make a move into Portier. There was not the room. He made contact with Pierre Gasly, and that caused Esteban's car to go up in the air. Now, we did get a red flag because of all the stuff with Hülkenberg, Perez and Kevin Magnussen. Esteban went into the pits and they just couldn't fix the car. So he had to retire anyway, right? But that incident did get referred to the stewards. Esteban initially got a 10-second time penalty. Because he had retired, they changed that into a 5-place grid penalty for the following race he takes part in. And I think this is where my confusion lies, in the consistency about what we deem to be a first lap incident and what we deem to actually be something that needs to be investigated, reviewed, and then given a penalty for. 3 of the drivers had literally DNF'd. You may as well have just called them in and had a chat with them. What else were they going to be doing? I mean, they weren't racing anymore. So I think that is where my confusion lies right now is, okay, yeah, the same outcome could have happened. You can still call it a lap 1 incident. However, I think for me, when I think a lap 1 incident, it's normally right at the start of the race when you've got all 20 cars trying to get through the first corner, trying to get through the first turn, and you can't really do too much. There are so many cars that are bunched up at that point. There's not a whole load you can do to move, get out of the way, all the rest of it, right? Esteban and Pierre's incident yeah, you didn't have all the cars bunched up. I get it. Esteban could have held back. If he wanted to make a move, could have done that later on. For Kevin and Nico and Sergio as well, same sort of thing. They weren't in a massive gaggle of cars. There was room. I don't necessarily think there was a need for that incident to happen either. But no, that wasn't investigated. Pierre's and Esteban's was, and I am just curious about what leads to the decisions about whether to investigate or not. So yeah, there was that. And on the topic of Esteban and Pierre's incident, right? Esteban obviously retired, and according to Crofty, Bruno Famin, who is the team principal for Alpine at the moment, had gone to Canal Plus, which I believe is the French broadcaster for F1, and had basically said, yeah, there will be consequences for Esteban having done what he had done, and basically a sort of he's going to have to pay for his mistakes, right? So my thing here is that I completely get it. Apparently both drivers were told, don't make stupid, unnecessary moves, basically. Before the race, they got sat down and told that. And I get it, because you just want both cars to come home, especially on a track like Monaco. Esteban did not heed that advice, quite obviously, and did what he did. And to be fair, he wrecked his own race because of it. Pierre finished in the points, no problem. Esteban, however, wrecked his own race. So I completely get it that there was no way he was going to get away with that from Alpine's, point of view. They were going to have to sit down, have a chat with him, whatever you were going to say or do. Fine. Do I necessarily think a team principal should come onto TV, onto French TV as a French team, French drivers, French TP, I believe, and then say all of this live on air? No. And some people might think, oh, you know what does it matter? He's a grown man. It doesn't really matter. I know how I would feel if I was going to have someone publicly, or like a manager have a go at me publicly, right? And not just in front of your colleagues, but on TV. You might be angry. You might be upset. I completely get that. But I don't think there's a need to necessarily air that for everyone else to hear. That's my personal opinion. I feel like, I wouldn't expect Bruno not to be angry here, right? That's not the issue. I expect him to be angry and upset and annoyed at Esteban, for Pierre to be annoyed at Esteban, for the team to be. That I don't have an issue with. Everyone is entitled to their feelings as well. And what Esteban did, like I said, it wrecked his own race and it could have taken both of the cars out. However, I just think that those things should be dealt with behind closed doors. No need to air it out to everyone. Those were the two biggest incidents. We also had Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri making contact in the first lap, and Carlos either had a puncture or locked up, fell to the back of the pack, but the red flag, the reorder for the restart, meant that Carlos wasn't actually going to lose any of his places and would be starting back in P3. After that, though, there really wasn't much that went on at the Monaco Grand Prix. It was a fairly quiet race. There really wasn't much going on. We had the top four, which were Charles, Oscar, Carlos, and Lando. They set the pace, they were up front, and then there was a lot of seconds in between Lando and George. About 2 seconds between George and Max, a couple of seconds between him and Lewis. Then there was a bit more of a gap, and then it was sort of the rest of the field and slight gaps in between groups. So there, not many overtakes going on. We had 1 or 2, maybe a couple of late pit stops coming from Lewis and Max, but those didn't make an impact either. Lando trying to get third place, Oscar once or twice trying to get into P1, didn't manage it. But that was the race in a nutshell. However, the best piece of news, I think, for me at least, that came out of this race was Charles Leclerc finally winning the Monaco Grand Prix. 10 laps to go into this race, right? 10 laps. Lap 60 out of 78, and I started to feel so nervous for him because anything can happen, even though Monaco isn't a place where you can necessarily overtake very well, and he did look like he was handling the race super well. Things can happen though. Drivers, you momentarily lose concentration on a track like Monaco and you're in a wall. You can't tell what's going to happen with the car, even though reliability has been good across a lot of the cars this season so far, right? You don't know when that luck might be up, or when an engine might just not decide to work, or suddenly there's a plastic bag that gets flown onto the track and it ends up under your car and it ruins your race. There is so much like that can happen. And with Charles Leclerc's luck around Monaco, I had multiple different things going through my mind about what potentially could happen with him. But he crossed the finish line. He had opened up the gap towards the end of the race to Oscar Piastri as well. It was about 5 or 6 seconds, and it was beautiful to watch. It was so amazing to watch. I cried watching Charles win. I cried listening to the commentary Crofty had, and then the F1 TV commentary one of my friends sent me, cried at that as well. I was teary watching him up on the podium. I was a bit of an emotional mess when it came to Charles winning the Monaco Grand Prix, because it meant so much to him. Drivers dream of winning the Monaco Grand Prix. It's part of the Triple Crown in motorsport, and there, like I said, so much prestige that comes along with it. But when the Monaco Grand Prix is also your home race, when Charles talks about the fact that he would take the bus to school on those roads, and it's his city, he grew up there, and even though a lot of the drivers live there now, they didn't grow up there like Charles. They didn't see their family there. They haven't got that many friends compared to Charles on their balconies because they live there. You know, his mum, his brothers, all of his friends, his school is there. You know, Charles literally has friends that can look over the balcony from where they live onto the track. And I don't know many other drivers who have a home race where, yeah, you have friends that live technically on the circuit. So a lot of emotions, but such a beautiful win. Such a beautiful win to watch and to listen. And seeing him come out of his car, you know, screaming and so happy. Seeing all of Ferrari that happy for him. Seeing how happy Carlos Sainz was. Your teammate is always your biggest competition, but you could completely and utterly tell how much Carlos wanted this win for Charles. He knew how much it meant to Charles. He knew how well, and he'd said, you know, Charles been driving so well this weekend that he wanted him to have that home race win, and it just meant so much to everyone in Ferrari. John Elkann there, you know, Fred Vasseur, who seemed so freaking pleased with this. Prince Albert, I mean, the Prince of Monaco, just so chuffed and looked like he was crying when he was giving the trophy over to Charles and everything. You can't pay for moments like that in sport, and it's why I love watching sport, is when it tugs at emotions like that. It's phenomenal. And I think to now be in a season where we have 2 wins, where it's brought out so many emotions in so many F1 fans, right? I think regardless of whether you're a massive Charles Leclerc fan or not, it was the same, I think, with Lando's win. Whether or not you were a huge fan of him or not, it was just beautiful to watch him win his first race. And it was the same sort of thing with Charles now, with Monaco, where to see him get this win after so long, after all of the bad luck, after not finishing races, bad strategy calls, you know, just not being able to convert poles into wins, to finally get that is absolutely beautiful. It just was such a beautiful moment to watch. And yep, it was worth sitting through 77 laps, 76, 75 laps of not a whole load going on, just to be able to see Charles Leclerc get that win in the end. We've also now seen Oscar Piastri on the podium, and he has not had great luck the past couple of races. When it looks like he's going to do well, badly timed safety cars for him. When it looks like he's going to start on the front row, grid penalty for him. You know, he's not had the best luck during the past 2 or 3 races, I would say, but he pulled in a stellar performance, looked after his tyres so well, and that, I think, is something that really needs to be spoken about for Oscar Piastri. He did not have the best tyre management skills in his rookie year, which is completely understandable. The tyres between F2 and F1 are very different, and I wouldn't expect a rookie just to know straight off the bat what to do and how to manage them well. Beginning of the year as well, you know, we heard Andrea Stella say it wasn't great, and Oscar said that himself as well. What we saw in Monaco though, because after that red flag, most of the drivers put on a set hard, and we're praying they would just get them to the end of the race. And Oscar managed to make that last. You know, he kept his head down, was very cool, calm and collected, as Oscar tends to be, but did so well. Didn't really put a foot wrong in the race. Like I said, so easy to lose concentration in Monaco and, you know, lose the car and crash. And, you know, to get P2 in your second race as an F1 driver in Monaco is absolutely insane, and he should be so chuffed with that result. Carlos Sainz rounded out the podium, so it was a double podium for Ferrari, and I think he was more happy for Charles more than anything else. I think he was just chuffed that Charles managed to get the win. Would have been lovely to see a Ferrari one too, but I think even Carlos was like, you know what? Charles got the win, so that was the main thing. Looking at the entire weekend though in Monaco, looking at Ferrari and McLaren in particular, right? They were the ones setting the pace. Ferrari definitely, I think, just had a little bit of edge over McLaren, but both of those teams, especially in the race, to pull away from the rest of the pack so easily, still look after their tyres and everything. I mean, those 4 drivers in a league of their own, and that was across both of their drivers, right? There wasn't necessarily one driver that was miles and miles ahead of the other. All 4 drivers in those 2 teams did a fantastic job. And now this brings up the question of what is going to happen in the championships? What's going to happen with Red Bull? Now, I am not writing off Red Bull by any means. I think they tend to have a bit of a difficult time when it gets to certain street tracks. We saw it last year in Singapore, and we saw it here out in Monaco, right? Helmut Marko and Christian Horner said there is just an issue with the car when it comes to curb riding. This wasn't necessarily something they could have fixed with their setup or anything like that. It's an issue they need to go back and understand and learn how to fix. So there wasn't going to be a quick fix for them out in Monaco, right? They did the best with what they could. And, you know, P6 for Max was still a good result. Not the best. I know he would have wanted better, but it wasn't awful. Gutting that obviously Checo DNF'd, but I don't think he was going to score points anyway. What I do think though, and I'm not by any means ruling out Red Bull here. They are still leading both championships. I don't think it's going to be an easy ride for them this season. Imola, what we ended up seeing was them really struggling in practice, pulled it together for qualifying in the race, right? That's fine. Miami, obviously Lando Norris got that win. And then out in Monaco, they struggled throughout practice. Not the best time in qualifying. And the race, okay, fair enough. You can't get many overtakes in, but you get what I'm saying, right? So I do think the tides are slowly, very slowly turning with Red Bull and the amount of dominance that they've had over the past couple of seasons. Not to say they're not going to win any more races. I still think they are the best team on the grid. I still think they're the team that the others need to catch up with. But I think the pressure is on with Red Bull to execute perfectly week in, week out. Not that they weren't doing it before, but I think they really just have to make sure that everything is working so perfectly and so in sync. Because one foot wrong, one wrong setup, one bad strategy call, anything like that, you have 2 teams now who are there. They are so close to you guys now. That one wrong step is going to mean that you guys lose a podium position, lose P1, because Ferrari and McLaren are just continuously looking stronger. So I'm going to be really interested to see what happens over the next couple of races, because I do think that Canada will go a lot better for Red Bull. I don't think it'll be anywhere near as bad as what Monaco was, but I don't think it's going to be as easy as it was for them beforehand. And it was easy just because they had built the best car and they had Max Verstappen. They still do have Max Verstappen in that car that can rinse every single bit of speed out of it, right? But you have other cars now that are able to catch up, and the drivers in those cars are getting excited and they're thinking, you know what, maybe we could do this. Maybe we're not that far away and we can compete for race wins. So definitely going to be interested to see what happens with Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari over the next couple of races. Ferrari have managed to close that gap a little bit more with Red Bull in the constructors, which is super exciting to see, and with Charles in the drivers' championship. He's only about 31 points away from Max Verstappen at the moment. And I think now Lando Norris has jumped into P3. The other thing with Red Bull now is obviously you've got 4 drivers behind Red Bull in good cars that are performing at a really high level and doing very, very well. They need both of their drivers to be doing the same at Red Bull. And Max Verstappen puts in performance after performance after performance. Now what they need is to make sure that Checo Perez is having those strong weekends and able to fight right behind or in front of Max Verstappen. That's what they need. They can't have him behind McLaren or Ferrari. They need him in front of them, especially to secure the Constructors' Championship more than anything else, because Ferrari aren't that far behind, and both Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc are driving very, very well this season. And right after them, McLaren, Lando Norris boosts the confidence after that Miami win, and Oscar Piastri is continuously getting better, as shown by his tyre management skills, slowly just learning, absorbing everything and getting better. And, you know, he's seen his teammate get a Grand Prix win. I'm sure he's going to want one of those this season. So all 4 of those drivers are going to be so driven and competitive at this point because they know they have a car that can get them on the podium and can get them the wins and bring some silverware home to their teams. So that was the Monaco Grand Prix. There was not a lot going on, but a lot of emotions by the end of the weekend. No race next weekend. I should be back with an episode though next Tuesday, and then we're heading out to Canada. And then we head back into the European season, right? Like I said, super excited to see what goes on in Canada, whether Red Bull will have a resurgence, whether Aston Martin will sort out their issues and get into Q3 again, what's going to go on with Mercedes as well, because once again, we seem to be back in no man's land, and also what these consequences are for Alpine's Esteban Ocon. Thank you guys so much for listening though, and diolch yn fawr. And make sure you follow this podcast or subscribe on YouTube, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the steward's office.